Welcome back, everyone. I'm Yossi Goslin, NBA salary cap expert, and I'm going to talk about the Sacramento Kings going into the trade deadline. It's time to get into them. They've been in the news a lot recently. There were the De'Aaron Fox rumors from last week, and now they've dropped 5 straight. They can't win a clutch game, even though they've got Fox and DeMar DeRozan on the roster. And they are about 3 games below the play-in range. And all this has culminated in them firing Mike Brown, which was a really surprising and controversial move. So I'm going to get into that, give my thoughts on that, on the De'Aaron Fox stuff as well, and just kind of gauge their overall direction right now and get an idea of what their trade deadline might look like. I'll give a couple examples like I've done in my free agency videos. So I'm going to get into all of that. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And please check out my Substack, The Third Apron, where I get into even deeper salary cap analysis. The link is in the description. The Kings firing Mike Brown is mostly surprising given that he's their best coach in decades. He's their best coach since Rick Adelman. He's accomplished the most with them. And it seems like it's been a little more trendy for head coaches to get fired shortly after bringing a big accomplishment for their teams. Frank Vogel got fired 2 years after helping the Lakers win their title. Same thing happened with Mike Budenholzer with the Bucks. I'm sure there's a couple other examples out there I'm not thinking of. But here you got Mike Brown. He led the Kings to their first playoff appearance in 16 years and gets cut a year and a half after that. So a lot more impatience going on organizationally across the league with head coaches. Sounds like he may have lost the locker room. Sounds like maybe the De'Aaron Fox stuff has something to do with it. He did call out Fox during the postgame of the Pistons game for fouling Jaden Ivey on that 3 that cost him the game. I'm just not sure who they can get that's better out there. Jordi Fernandez, he's not available. He was their assistant last year. That would have been a pretty great addition. Overall, pretty bad look for the Kings. I've seen a lot of Kings fans holding the front office and ownership accountable, and coaches around the league are pretty upset. Michael Malone, he went in on the Kings. He said a bunch of things. Pretty great stuff. Biggest takeaway, I don't want to get into the whole thing. It was a lot, but the one, he said that they have no class, no balls, but also that he isn't shocked because he was also fired by them about 10 years ago, actually. In fact, it looks like the Kings may have done Malone even dirtier than they just did to Mike Brown. So 10 years ago, they started the season 9-6. Then DeMarcus Cousins got meningitis. They went 2-7 in his absence, and then the Kings fired him once they dipped below 500. Again, maybe there was more to this firing as well, but clear pattern of impatience on the coaching side. So where are the Kings going from here? I think it's abundantly clear that they still want to be competitive and make the playoffs. There probably is some truth to the De'Aaron Fox rumors, and the Kings are probably on somewhat of a clock to improve the situation. He becomes an expiring contract next season. But I do not expect them to trade him at all this upcoming season. You don't fire the coach and then subsequently trade your best player. But with that said, he has been linked to several teams. The initial report from The Athletic had him linked to the Spurs. And on the Hoop Collective, Tim McMahon also mentioned the Heat, Rockets, and Lakers. I'm not going to get detailed on that. If the Kings situation gets worse and we get into the offseason, I could make a whole video on how each of these teams could make a deal for Fox. But I will note that McMahon did specifically mention that he thinks that the Spurs and Rockets would be really good fits, in his opinion, for Fox, and mentions how Fox is a Houston native. And I would agree that Houston's probably in the driver's seat among all these teams in terms of getting a deal done. They have not only the draft picks to make an appealing offer, but they've got the players that I think would interest the Kings, because I think they would want to stay competitive even if they have to trade Fox. So next summer, Fox, he'll be eligible to extend for 4 years, $228 million. I don't think the Supermax is going to happen. I don't see him getting all NBA this year, but he's going to have 1 year left on his deal. And if he doesn't want to extend with the Kings next summer, that's generally the signal that they might have to trade him. On the other hand, maybe all this All these reports coming out could just be him putting pressure to make sure he gets offered the max contract. Who knows? But either way, I think the Fox situation will be an interesting one to monitor over the next 6 to 7 months. So now that we're roughly 6 weeks away from the trade deadline, I think the Kings are going to use the first week or so to see how the coaching change works. They've got the Christie on the interim, and first I think they'll want to see if just the coaching change alone can clean up a lot of their issues. If that doesn't work, I would imagine that they're going to do something at the trade deadline to mix things up. The thing is, as I look at the roster, I think it's a little too fundamentally flawed. So as I get into trade scenarios, I just struggle to find any particular move that could make this group meaningfully better. So when you look at what they have to trade, picks wise, it's a little complicated. They still owe a first round pick to the Hawks, but seeing how they're struggling, that might not convey for a while. So optimally, they can trade up to 2 first round picks, which would be in 28 and 2030. But with the Kings looking kind of uncertain in the long term with the whole Fox situation and their current struggles, I think it's a little risky right now to part with any first round draft equity in the future. They also only have 2 second round picks, so they don't really have too much in the draft pick department. But then what about players? Assuming De'Aaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis are off the table, they don't have too much in that department either. I think first you got DeMar DeRozan. He's a little older, hard to plug in on many teams. Malik Monk, he's been their best high volume shooter, so I kind of can't see them moving him right now. And then you've got guys like Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles. Those two together have been a pretty trendy combination. People have been putting together in fake trades to make the salary filler, to make something happen. And I just bring this up because I wonder, how are they feeling about Keegan Murray? He's been one of their better defenders, but he's regressed on offense, and that's a really big concern. And I just bring it up because 2 years ago, they boldly traded Tyrese Halliburton to get Sabonis. And I just wonder if they might be willing to do something that aggressive. I doubt it, but just something I kind of have in the back of my head. So I think ideally they would want to perhaps swap DeRozan, try to get a younger 3-and-D player. But like I said, I just struggle to find teams that could use him. So I think most realistically, their most significant move would probably come from a Huerter Lyles with draft picks type package. And it's also worth noting that the Kings are just $2.1 million below the luxury tax line. So a couple things. One, any trade they make will probably have the salaries relatively equal, whatever they have going out and whatever they have coming in. And they also have several trade exceptions. They still have their mid-level exception, biannual exception. I wouldn't expect those to be useful because of their proximity to the tax. And with that in mind, I would not expect them, because of their limitations, to acquire one of the bigger names that might be available, like Jimmy Butler or Zach LaVine. But let's say the Kings do want to make a big trade like this. They could still pull it off, so I'll show you how. And let's say they want Zach LaVine. They've had interest in him in the past. They gave him an offer sheet in 2018 that the Bulls ultimately matched. Let's say they still want to pursue him. He's having a really good year, and maybe they don't have to give up a first-round pick just because he's on such a huge contract. So to make the money work, they could do DeMar DeRozan, Kevin Huerter, and Trey Lyles, and they can time it where the salaries they're sending out is just above what his trade bonus would increase his salary to. So it'd bump up his salary from $43 million to $48 million. And since the Bulls are involved, DeMar can't go there this season since they traded him to the Kings, so he'd have to go to a third team. So already there's a lot of complications towards getting this deal done. But they can do it. They end up having the same proximity to the tax as they had before making the trade, about $2.1 million before. They lose 2 roster spots, but that's fine because all they got to do is get back to 14, and they could sign someone to that 14 spot, still stay below the tax. They can even start signing players to 10 days. That would only cost about $120,000 per signing, and they can do that to maximize their space as they get closer to the trade deadline. So it could work. I think that on the court swapping DeMar DeRozan for Zach LaVine, who's shooting 45% from three this year, that would be somewhat of an upgrade. But I don't think the Kings would want to add a third max player. The team's already getting very slowly expensive over the past few years after giving Sabonis his contract. They're going to have to pay Keegan Murray soon. And De'Aaron Fox, if they keep him, he's going to be getting an even bigger max contract on his next deal. So if they were to get a guy like LaVine, getting a third max player, they'd probably be stuck with him until the end of that deal, just because of just how big that contract is. Still about 2 years left beyond this point. So that would be an issue, especially if they do end up having to trade Fox, just because they could possibly make the money work. I just don't see them doing this. And now I want to get into a scenario that's a little more realistic, trading for a player in the low $20 million range, ideally a forward like Kyle Kuzma or Cam Johnson, who I use in this example. I did discuss the Kings potentially acquiring these two players in my Kings free agency video from last summer, and I could see the Kings having a little more urgency to get a guy like Cam Johnson at this point. So trading Kevin Huerter and Trey Lyles would make the money work, and they'd open up even a little more tax flexibility to do something else. But the Nets have had pretty high prices for their veterans recently, getting 4 first-round picks and Mikal Bridges and Cam Johnson for Kevin Durant, and then getting 5 first-round picks for Mikal Bridges. I would imagine that they're going to have a pretty high price for Cam Johnson, who's playing really well this year. He's on a great contract that's descending with 2 years left after this. I would imagine they'll probably want like at least 2 first-round picks to get something going, which is the maximum the Kings can trade. I could also see the Nets pushing for Keegan Murray in this scenario, and that's going to be a tough decision for the Kings. Maybe the Nets can then send back something else, like they could send back Day'Ron Sharpe. He would help the Kings a good amount, and they could still deduct the tax in that scenario. Maybe they could send back some seconds. I just think that's going to be a very complicated decision for the Kings to make. So most likely to be a draft picks type thing. But I think they're even more realistically looking at something a little smaller than that. Maybe they could still do something with the Nets involving Kevin Huerter and some second round picks to get a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, who I'm sure I'm going to be repeating a lot over the next month because his salary and can help him fit on so many teams. I'm sure everybody wants him. But I think that's kind of the route they're more looking at realistically, where they can bolster their bench, make marginal improvements there, which they desperately need. Their bench does need a lot of help right now. But either way, I don't think that any of these moves are going to make the Kings or their long-term situation meaningfully better, which means we could be in store for an interesting summer in Sacramento.